I woke up to the sound of grinding metal and whirring brushes at 6 in the morning, which wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't a Saturday in late October. I stumbled to my bedroom window and peered through the blinds at the street below. A massive street sweeper, emblazoned with Meadowbrook HOA services in neat white letters, was making its way down Maple Grove Drive in Edgewater, New Jersey. The thing looked like it had been custom ordered just for our neighborhood, all shiny and industrial, with rotating brushes the size of truck tires. My name is Scott Thompson, and I'd lived in the Meadowbrook community for 3 years. It was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked like a slightly different version of the same architectural fever dream, and the HOA ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of community standards. I'd managed to stay under their radar for the most part, paying my dues on time and keeping my grass at the regulation 2.5 inches. But I had a feeling that was about to change. The street sweeper passed my house, and I watched as its brushes kicked up the neat pile of autumn leaves I'd spent 2 hours raking yesterday afternoon. The leaves were supposed to stay at the curb until Monday when the town's leaf collection service came through. I'd followed the HOA guidelines to the letter, bagged half for compost, left half loose in a tidy mound exactly 18 inches from the street, as specified in Section 12.4 of the Meadowbrook Community Handbook. I threw on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt and headed outside, already knowing what I'd find. Sure enough, the street sweeper's powerful brushes had picked up about 20% of my leaves and scattered the rest across my front lawn like nature's confetti cannon had exploded. What made it worse was that the machine's vacuum system had apparently malfunctioned or been turned off, so instead of collecting the leaves, it just redistributed them in the most chaotic pattern imaginable. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, staring at the disaster. Orange and red maple leaves covered every square inch of my front yard, mixed with brown oak leaves from 3 houses down. Some had even made it onto my porch and were plastered against my front door. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "You've reached the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. For emergencies, please press 1. I pressed 1. Another voicemail. "This is for emergency maintenance requests only. Please leave a detailed message with your name, address, and the nature of your emergency." "Yeah, hi, this is Scott Thompson at 247 Maple Grove Drive. Your street sweeper just destroyed the leaf pile I had ready for collection and scattered leaves all over my lawn. This needs to be fixed immediately." I hung up and stared at my yard again. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd probably get a violation notice for having an unkempt lawn before anyone addressed the mess the HOA's own equipment had made. I spent the next 3 hours re-raking my entire front yard. By the time I finished, I had 2 full piles at the curb again, plus 3 extra bags of leaves that I hadn't originally planned to bag. My back ached. My hands had blisters forming even through my work gloves, and I was in the foulest mood imaginable. Monday morning rolled around, and instead of the town's leaf collection, guess what showed up? The same HOA street sweeper, bright and early at 6:30. I watched from my living room window as it approached my house. This time, I had my phone out, recording video as the machine's brushes launched my carefully arranged leaf piles back onto my lawn like a botanical tsunami. "Oh, hell no," I said, grabbing my keys and heading out. I jogged down the street after the sweeper, waving my arms. The driver, a guy in his 20s wearing earbuds and completely oblivious to the world, kept driving. I followed him for 2 blocks until he finally stopped at a stop sign, and I ran up and knocked on his window. He startled, pulling out one earbud. Yeah. Do you realize you're blowing everyone's leaf piles back onto their lawns? He shrugged. I just drive where they tell me. HOA says sweep the streets Monday and Saturday mornings. But the town's leaf collection hasn't even come yet. You're just making a mess. Another shrug. Take it up with the HOA, man. I'm just doing my job. He put his earbud back in and drove off, leaving me standing in the middle of Maple Grove Drive like an idiot. I called the HOA office as soon as they opened. A woman answered on the third ring. Meadowbrook HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. This is Scott Thompson on Maple Grove. I need to speak to someone about the street sweeper schedule. It's been blowing leaf piles back onto people's lawns before the town picks them up. I'll transfer you to our operations manager. The phone rang for a solid minute before another woman picked up. Her voice had that particular tone of someone who considers every conversation an interruption to their very important day. This is Deborah. How can I help you? Hi, Deborah. I'm having an issue with the street sweeper your company is running. It's been scattering leaf piles back onto lawns before the town's collection service comes through. The street sweeper operates on a fixed schedule approved by the board. It runs Saturday and Monday mornings. Right, but the town's leaf collection is also on Monday mornings. Your sweeper is coming through before the collection truck and making a mess. Mr. Thompson, is it? The street sweeper is an amenity provided by your HOA to ensure clean, debris-free streets throughout the community. Perhaps you should consider bagging your leaves instead of leaving them loose. I did bag half of them, but according to your own guidelines, we're allowed to leave loose piles for the town's vacuum truck. The problem is your sweeper is hitting them before the town gets here. I'll make a note of your concern and bring it up at the next board meeting. That's scheduled for the third Thursday of next month. Next month? That's 5 weeks away. Leaf season will be over by then. Board meetings are held on a fixed schedule, Mr. Thompson. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I closed my eyes and counted to 5. Can you at least adjust the timing so the sweeper comes after the town's leaf collection? That would require a board vote. I can add it to the agenda for next month's meeting. This is ridiculous. Sir, I don't appreciate your tone. We're all volunteers here, working hard to maintain property values for everyone in Meadowbrook. If you have concerns, you're welcome to attend the meeting and voice them during the public comment period. Have a good day. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, then looked out at my leaf-covered lawn. I'd already spent Monday afternoon re-raking everything for the second time this week, and I knew that come next Saturday, the whole cycle would repeat itself. Tuesday morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. The envelope had the Meadowbrook HOA logo embossed on the front, which was never a good sign. I opened it while walking back to my house. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has come to our attention that your property at 247 Maple Grove Drive is in violation of community standards, specifically Section 8.2, Lawn Maintenance and Debris. Your front lawn contains excessive leaf coverage, creating an unsightly appearance that negatively impacts neighborhood aesthetics. Please remedy this violation within 72 hours or face a fine of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Sincerely, Deborah Kensington, HOA President. I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. Deborah Kensington. The same Deborah I'd spoken to on the phone, the same Deborah whose street sweeper had created the mess she was now fining me for. I called the HOA office again. Brenda answered. Hi, Brenda. I need to speak with Deborah Kensington. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kensington is in meetings all day. Can I take a message? I just received a violation notice for leaves on my lawn that your street sweeper put there. I'll have her call you back when she's available. When will that be? I really can't say. She has a very full schedule. I hung up and looked at the violation notice again. 72 hours. That took me to Friday morning, which meant I'd be raking my lawn for the third time, just in time for the Saturday sweeper to trash it again. I spent Tuesday afternoon researching New Jersey HOA laws. It turned out that HOAs had broad authority to enforce community standards, but they also had to follow their own rules consistently. If they were creating the problem they were citing me for, that could be grounds for a dispute. I drafted a formal letter citing the conflict between their street sweeper schedule and the leaf collection timeline, included timestamps from my video footage, and requested an emergency board meeting to address the issue. Wednesday morning, I got a response. Not from Deborah, but from someone named Patricia Morales, who identified herself as the HOA's legal liaison. The letter was full of legal boilerplate, essentially saying that my complaint had been received, would be reviewed according to standard procedures, and that the violation notice remained in effect pending resolution. So basically, they'd tied it up in red tape while I'd still be on the hook for fines. I raked my lawn again Wednesday afternoon. By this point, I'd developed a system and could clear the whole yard in about 90 minutes. But my hands were covered in blisters, and I'd pulled something in my lower back. I was 34 years old, worked as a software developer, and suddenly felt like I'd aged 20 years doing manual labor that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. Thursday evening, I was sitting on my front porch with an ice pack on my back when my neighbor, an older guy named Harold who'd lived in Meadowbrook since the development opened 15 years ago, came walking over. "Saw you raking again," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "Street sweeper get you too, 3 times now, and I got a violation notice for it." Harold laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Welcome to the club. Deborah's been on a warpath lately. She got elected president last year and decided to squeeze every penny out of the residents while spending like crazy on improvements nobody asked for. Like the street sweeper. Exactly like the street sweeper. She convinced the board we needed our own instead of relying on the town's service. Cost the association 50 grand, which meant raising everyone's dues. Then she set up this schedule that makes no sense, and now half the neighborhood is getting violation notices. Why hasn't anyone done anything? People have tried. She controls the board meetings with an iron fist. Got 3 of her friends on the 5-person board, so any vote goes her way. Plus, she's got time. Most of us work full-time, have families. She's a stay-at-home mom whose kids are all in high school, so this is her full-time job. That's insane. That's Deborah. Harold stood up, his knees cracking. Word of advice: document everything. Every interaction, every problem, every violation notice. If enough people push back with evidence, maybe the management company that actually runs things will step in. I thought about that conversation all night. Friday morning, I raked my lawn again, taking before and after photos with timestamps. I'd beaten the 72-hour deadline by about 6 hours. Then Saturday morning came, and right on schedule, the street sweeper turned my pristine lawn back into a leaf apocalypse. I stood in my yard, rake in hand, staring at the mess. I'd spent more than 10 hours over the past week raking leaves that I'd already raked. I documented everything, filed formal complaints, and received nothing but bureaucratic runarounds in response. My back hurt, my hands hurt, and I was done playing by rules that only seemed to apply to me. That's when I had the idea. I went inside and pulled up the Meadowbrook HOA website. They had a directory of board members with their addresses listed, presumably so residents could contact them with concerns. Deborah Kensington lived at 89 Oakmont Circle, which was the street that ran parallel to mine, 1 block over. I spent Saturday afternoon not raking my leaves. Instead, I studied the street sweeper's route. It came down Maple Grove from the north end, turned west on Birch Lane, then went down several side streets before circling back. Oakmont Circle was part of the route, but the sweeper always came from the south, sweeping northward. Deborah's house was near the north end of Oakmont. Sunday, I woke up early and walked the entire neighborhood, mapping out every street, every turn, every stop sign. I noted which streets had speed bumps, which had curved curbs, and where the storm drains were located. I felt like I was planning a heist, but really, I was just figuring out traffic patterns. Monday morning at 5, I was already awake. I made coffee, got dressed in dark clothes, and headed out with a wheelbarrow, 3 traffic cones, and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The street sweeper always parked overnight in the community center lot, which was tucked into a corner of the development near the entrance. I'd watched the driver arrive Saturday morning, so I knew he got there around 6, did some kind of pre-trip inspection, then started his route by 6:15. At 5:30, I positioned my first traffic cone on Birch Lane with a handwritten "Road Work Ahead" detour sign. I added an arrow pointing toward an alternate route that would take the sweeper up Madison Avenue instead. At the next intersection, I placed another cone and sign directing toward Oakmont Circle. I'd spent Sunday evening making the signs look as official as possible, printed on yellow paper with bold black text. The tricky part was the leaves. I'd left my leaf piles at the curb as usual, but I'd also collected leaves from 3 of my neighbors who were happy to contribute once. I'd explained what the street sweeper had been doing. One of them, a woman named Jennifer, had her own beef with Deborah over a fence violation and insisted on helping. "I've been looking for a way to get back at her for months," Jennifer had said, hauling bags of leaves from her backyard. "This is perfect." By 5:45, I had approximately 15 bags worth of leaves distributed along the curb on Oakmont Circle, specifically concentrated in front of 89. I'd raked them into loose piles that looked natural, like someone had put them out for collection. The town's leaf vacuum truck wouldn't come through for another few hours. At 6, I moved my car to a spot 3 blocks away where I could see Oakmont Circle, but wouldn't be obvious. I had my coffee, my phone camera ready, and a solid alibi that I'd gone out for an early morning drive because I couldn't sleep. 6:15. Right on schedule, the street sweeper started its route. I watched it come down Maple Grove, approach Birch Lane, and slow at my first detour sign. The driver hesitated, probably trying to figure out if the sign was legitimate. But road work wasn't uncommon in New Jersey, especially with the constant freeze-thaw cycles tearing up pavement, and the sign looked official enough. He followed the detour. My heart was pounding as the sweeper turned onto Madison Avenue, then followed my second sign toward Oakmont Circle. It was actually working. The massive machine, with its rotating brushes spinning at full speed, turned onto Oakmont and headed north. I started recording video as the sweeper approached number 89. The piles of leaves I'd arranged were perfect. As the machine's brushes hit them, they exploded into the air like orange and red fireworks, coating Deborah Kensington's pristine lawn in a thick blanket of autumn foliage. Her Japanese maple trees, her decorative rock garden, her meticulously trimmed hedges, everything disappeared under layers of leaves. But the sweeper didn't stop there. It continued up Oakmont Circle, following its new route, redistributing leaves onto lawns all along the street. By the time it finished and the driver realized something was wrong with his route, he'd made a mess of half a dozen properties. I drove home, removed my detour signs, and stashed everything in my garage. By 7, I was back in my house, making breakfast like I'd never left. At 7:30, I heard the first raised voice outside. I looked out my window to see Deborah Kensington standing in her yard, still in her bathrobe, gesturing wildly at the carpet of leaves covering her property. Another neighbor was out, looking confused at his own leaf-covered lawn. Within minutes, there were 5 or 6 people gathered on Oakmont Circle, all talking at once. I waited until 8 to call the HOA office. Brenda answered. "Hi, Brenda. This is Scott Thompson. I wanted to report that there seems to be an issue with the street sweeper again this morning. I drove past Oakmont Circle earlier, and several properties there are covered in leaves. I thought the HOA should know." "Oh my God, yes. We've received several calls already. Mrs. Kensington is absolutely furious. That's terrible. Maybe there's something wrong with the sweeper's route. I'll pass the message along. Thank you for calling." I hung up and allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it felt good to see Deborah dealing with the same problem she'd been dismissing when it happened to everyone else. By noon, there was a notice in everyone's mailbox. Due to technical difficulties with routing, the street sweeper service will be suspended pending review. We apologize for any inconvenience. It was signed by Deborah Kensington, but I noticed it didn't apologize for the mess her sweeper had made or offer any solutions for cleanup. Tuesday morning, I got another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I'd missed the 72-hour deadline for my previous violation, as my lawn was still covered in leaves as of Saturday. I was being fined $100, with additional daily fines to accumulate until compliance was achieved. I called the office immediately. This time, Deborah answered. "Mrs. Kensington, I'm calling about the fine notice I just received." "Mr. Thompson, yes. Your property has been in violation for over a week now, because your street sweeper keeps blowing leaves onto my lawn. I've raked 4 times in the past week, and every time the sweeper comes through, it makes a mess again. The street sweeper is currently suspended, so that's no longer an issue. It's suspended as of yesterday, but I'm being fined for a problem that started over a week ago, which your equipment caused. Mr. Thompson, homeowners are responsible for maintaining their properties regardless of external factors. Weather, animals, equipment, these are all challenges we all face. The violation stands. This is insane. Your machine created the problem, and now you're fining me for it." "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone. The fine has been assessed according to community guidelines. If you wish to dispute it, you can file a formal appeal which will be reviewed at the next board meeting." "The next meeting isn't for 3 more weeks. That's correct. In the meantime, please ensure your property is brought into compliance. Have a good day." She hung up. I stared at my phone, anger boiling over. Then I looked at my computer where I'd been organizing all my documentation, videos of the street sweeper, photos of my lawn before and after, copies of every complaint I'd filed, timestamps showing I'd raked within the deadline, only to have the sweeper trash my yard hours later. I spent Tuesday afternoon researching New Jersey HOA dispute resolution laws. It turned out that HOAs had to follow a formal process for violations and fines, including giving residents reasonable opportunity to comply and considering mitigating circumstances. If an HOA's own actions created the violation, that was definitely a mitigating circumstance. I drafted another formal letter, this time including all my evidence, citing specific sections of both the HOA's own bylaws and New Jersey state law. I requested an emergency board hearing and stated that if the fine wasn't waived, I'd be filing a complaint with the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. Wednesday morning, I got a call from Patricia Morales, the legal liaison. "Mr. Thompson, I received your letter. I want to discuss your concerns." "Great. When can we schedule a hearing?" "Before we go down that road, I'd like to explore an informal resolution. The board is willing to waive the fine if you agree to drop any further complaints about the street sweeper." So basically, admit I was wrong even though I wasn't. It's not about right or wrong, it's about moving forward. The street sweeper service has been suspended while we review the schedule. Your fine would be waived. Everyone moves on. What about an apology? What about fixing the actual problem so this doesn't happen to other people? "Mr. Thompson, I'm offering you a practical solution to your immediate problem. My immediate problem is that the HOA president is abusing her authority and creating violations to fine residents." That's the actual problem. There was a long pause. "I'll schedule you for the public comment period at next month's board meeting. You'll have 5 minutes to present your concerns." 5 minutes. I have over 20 hours of documentation here. 5 minutes is standard for public comments. You can submit written materials in advance if you'd like them included in the board's review packet. I hung up feeling like I'd hit another brick wall, but I wasn't giving up. I spent the rest of Wednesday organizing my evidence into a presentation. Photos, videos, timeline of events, copies of all correspondence. I even created a simple chart showing the street sweeper schedule versus the town's leaf collection schedule, highlighting the conflict. Thursday, I got home from work to find another notice from the HOA. This one informed me that my trash bins were visible from the street 12 hours after collection, violating Section 9.6 of Community Standards. The fine was $50. I walked around to my side yard, where I always kept my trash bins. They were in exactly the same spot they'd been for 3 years, tucked against the house behind a wooden screen that blocked them from street view. I took photos from every angle, showing that the bins were clearly not visible from the street unless you walked onto my property and looked over the screen. This was retaliation, plain and simple. I challenged Deborah, and now she was hitting back with whatever violations she could dream up. Friday morning, I was putting together a folder of evidence for the new violation when my doorbell rang. It was Harold, my neighbor, along with Jennifer and 2 other residents I'd seen around but never formally met. "Got a minute?" Harold asked. I let them in, and we sat in my living room. Harold spoke first. "We've been comparing notes. All 5 of us have gotten bogus violation notices in the past week. Mine was for having a wreath on my door that's supposedly not in compliance with the holiday decoration guidelines, even though it's just a fall wreath and it's October." Jennifer jumped in. "I got cited for having my car parked in my driveway overnight, which has never been a violation before. She's making up rules as she goes." One of the others, a guy named Marcus, added, "I did some research. Deborah and her husband bought their house 5 years ago. Since then, the HOA's annual budget has gone from $40,000 to over $90,000, but nobody can explain where all that extra money is going. The financial reports she presents at meetings are vague as hell." The fourth person, a woman named Lisa, pulled out her phone. "I started a Facebook group for Meadowbrook residents yesterday, just to share information about HOA issues. In less than 24 hours, 40 people joined, and at least 15 have reported similar problems. Either bogus violations, fines for things that shouldn't be violations, or problems that the HOA created and then blamed on residents." "So what do we do?" I asked. Harold leaned forward. "We organize. The next board meeting is 3 weeks away. We get every person who's had issues to show up and speak during public comment. We demand a full financial audit, and we start the process of recalling Deborah from the board. Can we do that? According to the bylaws, yes. We need signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a special election. There are 230 homes in Meadowbrook, so we need 46 signatures. Based on what Lisa's already hearing, that should be easy. Over the next 3 weeks, our group became a full-fledged resistance movement. We met twice a week at different people's houses, going over documentation, preparing presentations, and collecting signatures. The Facebook group grew to over 100 members. People shared stories about excessive fines, retaliatory violations, and money being spent on projects nobody had voted for. We discovered that Deborah had approved the $50,000 street sweeper purchase with only a simple majority vote at a meeting where less than 10% of homeowners were present. According to the bylaws, major expenditures over $20,000 required approval from 2/3 of the board at a meeting with at least 30% of homeowners present or represented by proxy. The street sweeper purchase had been illegal from the start. Marcus, who worked as an accountant, got his hands on 3 years of financial records by filing a formal request. What he found was shocking. The HOA's management company charged a flat fee of $15,000 per year. Normal operating costs, insurance, maintenance, utilities for the community center ran about $30,000. That left $45,000 in annual fees unaccounted for. When Marcus dug deeper, he found that Deborah had set up a separate account labeled Special Projects that she alone had signatory authority over. Money had been flowing into that account and being spent on things like upgraded landscaping for the entrance sign, a new fountain in the community center lobby, and high-end furniture for the HOA office. There were also regular payments to a company called Meadowbrook Property Services. I looked up Meadowbrook Property Services, Marcus told us at one of our meetings. It's a landscaping and maintenance company. The owner is Robert Kensington, as in Deborah's husband. The room went silent. She's been funneling HOA money to her husband's company, Jennifer said. Looks like it. In the past 18 months, his company has received over $30,000 for various services. Some of it might be legitimate, but there's no competitive bidding process, no oversight, and the invoices are really vague. Just things like maintenance services or property improvements with no details. This was bigger than I'd thought. We weren't just dealing with an overzealous HOA president. We were potentially looking at embezzlement and fraud. We need to bring this to the board, Lisa said. Deborah controls the board, Harold countered. She'll shut down any discussion and bury it in committee. Then we go over her head, I suggested. File a complaint with the management company that actually runs the HOA operations, and if that doesn't work, we go to the police. We decided on a multi-pronged approach. First, we'd present everything at the board meeting to create a public record. Second, we'd file a formal complaint with Meadowbrook Management Group, the company that handled day-to-day operations and was supposed to provide oversight. Third, if those didn't work, we'd take it to law enforcement. The night before the board meeting, I barely slept. I'd prepared a 5-minute presentation that hit all the key points. The street sweeper issue and resulting violations, the pattern of retaliatory fines, the illegal purchase approval, the financial irregularities. I'd practiced it a dozen times, timing myself to make sure I stayed under the limit. The meeting was scheduled for 7 on a Thursday evening in the community center's main hall. When I arrived at 6:45, the parking lot was already packed. The room, which normally held maybe 20 people for board meetings, had at least 80 residents crammed in, with more arriving. Deborah looked shocked when she entered at 6:55. She'd clearly expected the usual sparse attendance. Instead, she was facing a room full of angry homeowners, many clutching folders of documentation. She called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, working through standard business items like approving the previous meeting's minutes and reviewing the treasurer's report. The other 4 board members, 2 men and 2 women who all seemed to be in Deborah's social circle, rubber-stamped everything without discussion. Then came public comment period. Deborah looked out at the room full of raised hands and pursed her lips. "We'll take comments in the order people signed up," she said, gesturing to a clipboard by the door. I'd been smart enough to arrive early and put my name first. She called my name, and I walked to the front with my laptop and a flash drive. "I'll need to use the projector for my presentation." "Public comments are verbal only, Mr. Thompson. The bylaws say residents can present information to the board. I have visual evidence that's relevant to my comments." She looked annoyed but nodded to the AV guy, probably a volunteer, who hooked up my laptop. My first slide appeared on the screen, a simple title: Street Sweeper Schedule Conflicts and Related Violations. I walked through everything. The videos of the sweeper blowing leaves onto lawns, the timeline showing it happened hours before my violation deadline. The photos proving I'd raked multiple times. The correspondence where the HOA dismissed my complaints, then fined me anyway. "In conclusion," I said as my timer hit 4 minutes, "the HOA created a problem with poor scheduling, refused to fix it, then profited by fining residents. This pattern of creating violations and retaliating against complaints needs to stop." Deborah's face was red. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Your concerns are noted. Next speaker." Harold went next, presenting the issue of made-up violations and showing how the enforcement had become arbitrary. Jennifer talked about the lack of transparency in decision-making. Marcus dropped the bomb about the financial irregularities, projecting copies of bank statements showing the payments to Meadowbrook Property Services. That's when things got heated. Deborah tried to shut down Marcus's presentation, claiming it was spreading false information. Marcus calmly responded that he'd obtained all the documents through proper channels, and that everything he was showing was factual. "Robert Kensington is your husband, correct?" Marcus asked. "That's irrelevant to HOA business. It's very relevant when his company has received over $30,000 in payments from an account you control with no board oversight." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Deborah tried to gavel them down, but it was chaos. Finally, she yelled, "This meeting is adjourned," and stormed out, followed by 2 of her board allies. The other 2 board members, looking uncomfortable, stayed behind. One of them, a woman named Susan, approached our group. "I didn't know about any of those payments. Deborah handles all the financial stuff. She says it's too complicated for the rest of us to worry about." "That's not how it's supposed to work," Marcus said. "The whole board is supposed to review and approve expenditures." "I know that now." "What do we do?" "Emergency board meeting. You and 1 other member call for it, according to the bylaws. We need a full accounting of all HOA finances, and we need to suspend Deborah's access to the accounts until this is resolved." Over the next week, things moved fast. Susan and Kevin, the other board member who'd stayed behind, called for an emergency meeting. When Deborah tried to block it, they went directly to Meadowbrook Management Group, which had the authority to override her. The management company, suddenly worried about their own liability, assigned a senior representative to attend and oversee the meeting. The emergency meeting happened on a Monday evening. This time, The management company required a full financial audit, conducted by an independent accounting firm. Deborah tried to argue that it was unnecessary, that Marcus had misunderstood the records, that her husband's company provided valuable services at competitive rates. The management company representative, a stern woman named Catherine, shut her down. Mrs. Kensington, either you cooperate with a voluntary audit, or we'll recommend that the board file a formal fraud complaint and let the authorities conduct an involuntary one. Your choice. Deborah went pale. She stammered something about needing to consult with her husband, then rushed out of the meeting. The audit took 2 weeks. During that time, Deborah stopped coming to the HOA office. Brenda, the receptionist, told me that Deborah had called in sick. All new violation notices stopped, which was a relief to everyone. When the audit results came back, they were damning. Over the past 3 years, Deborah had diverted more than $70,000 from HOA funds for unauthorized purposes. Some went to her husband's company for services that were never performed or were wildly overpriced. Some went to personal expenses that she'd classified as HOA business, like a $5,000 community relations dinner at an upscale restaurant that only she and her friends attended. The most egregious finding was that the street sweeper purchase had been padded. The machine should have cost $35,000, but Deborah had approved payment of $50,000 to a dealer owned by her husband's cousin. The extra $15,000 had been kicked back to Deborah in cash. Meadowbrook Management Group immediately suspended Deborah from all HOA activities and filed a report with the Edgewater Police Department. Within days, detectives were interviewing board members and residents, collecting evidence. I met with a detective named Rodriguez, a serious man in his 40s who took detailed notes as I walked through everything that had happened. I provided copies of all my documentation, including the videos of the street sweeper and the bogus violation notices. "This is good," Rodriguez said. "Very thorough. We're building a case for theft by deception and misconduct by a corporate official. New Jersey takes HOA fraud seriously because it affects so many people. What happens next?" "We continue gathering evidence, probably execute a search warrant for her financial records, then present everything to the prosecutor's office. If they agree there's enough for charges, we'll make an arrest." 2 weeks later, I was working from home when I heard commotion outside. I looked out to see 2 police cars parked in front of 89 Oakmont Circle. Deborah was being led out in handcuffs, her husband following behind, also in cuffs. Apparently, he'd been directly involved in the kickback scheme. The charges were extensive: theft by deception, conspiracy to commit theft, falsifying records, misconduct by a corporate official. The prosecutor's office announced that if convicted, Deborah could face up to 10 years in prison and fines up to $150,000. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested in embezzlement scheme ran on the evening broadcast, complete with footage of Deborah being arrested and interviews with residents. I declined to be interviewed on camera, but several other neighbors spoke about the excessive fines and retaliatory violations. The case moved through the court system over the next several months. Deborah initially pleaded not guilty, but as evidence mounted, her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges, agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA, and received a sentence of 18 months in prison followed by probation. Her husband got 6 months in probation for his role in the kickback scheme. The dealer who'd sold the overpriced street sweeper was also charged and pleaded guilty to conspiracy. With Deborah gone, the HOA board was restructured. Susan became interim president, and they held special elections to fill the vacant seats. Harold, Marcus, and Jennifer all ran and won, promising transparency and accountability. One of their first acts was to revise the street sweeper schedule so it ran after the town's leaf collection, instead of before. They also implemented new financial controls, requiring 2 board signatures for any expenditure over $500 and mandatory quarterly audits. The HOA sued Deborah and her husband for the full amount of stolen funds, plus legal fees. Her lawyer worked out a payment plan that would take them years to satisfy, but at least the money would come back to the association eventually. As for me, all my fines were waived, and I received a formal apology letter from the new board. They even reimbursed me for the time I'd spent documenting everything, classifying it as community service that saved the HOA thousands in investigative costs. The street sweeper itself became a point of debate. Some residents wanted to sell it and cut our losses. Others argued that it was a useful tool if scheduled properly. Eventually, the board decided to keep it, but hired a new operator who actually paid attention to what he was doing and coordinated with the town's collection schedule. That first properly scheduled sweep was oddly satisfying. I watched from my porch as the machine came down Maple Grove Drive, picking up the small amount of debris left after the town's leaf collection. My lawn stayed clean. No leaves blown everywhere. No violations. Just a quiet street in a quiet neighborhood. Harold came by that evening and we sat on my porch with beers, watching the sun set over Meadowbrook. "You know," he said, "I've lived here 15 years, and I never thought I'd see the day when the HOA actually worked the way it's supposed to. You think it'll last?" As long as people stay involved. That was the problem before. Everyone just paid their dues and ignored what was happening. Deborah took advantage of that. She picked the wrong neighborhood to mess with in the end. Harold laughed. She picked the wrong guy to dump leaves on. That whole rerouting the street sweeper thing, that was brilliant. I'd never told anyone about my early morning detour sign operation, but clearly, Harold was more observant than I'd given him credit for. I started to deny it, but he held up his hand. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me." But between you and me, watching her face that morning when she saw her yard covered in leaves, that made the whole thing worth it. We clinked our beer bottles together and sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over our little corner of Edgewater, New Jersey. The civil case against Deborah and her husband took another year to fully resolve. The HOA's lawyer, working on contingency, went after every asset they had. Their house on Oakmont Circle was sold to satisfy the judgment, forcing them to move to a small apartment in a neighboring town. Their cars, their savings, everything went toward paying back what Deborah had stolen. I ran into Robert Kensington once at a gas station about 6 months after the criminal case concluded. He was filling up an older model sedan, looking tired and defeated. We made eye contact and he quickly looked away. I thought about saying something, maybe asking how Deborah was doing in prison, but decided against it. They'd brought this on themselves, and I had nothing to gain from rubbing salt in the wound. The HOA continued to improve under the new leadership. They renegotiated contracts with vendors, cut unnecessary expenses, and actually reduced annual dues by 15% while still maintaining all essential services. Turns out when you're not funneling money to shell companies and padding invoices, running a homeowners association is pretty affordable. They also revised the violation enforcement process. Now, before any fine was issued, residents received a warning letter with photos of the alleged violation and a reasonable timeline to address it. If there were extenuating circumstances, there was an ombudsman. Harold had volunteered for the role, who could waive or reduce penalties. The days of arbitrary enforcement and retaliatory fines were over. Marcus became the treasurer and implemented a complete overhaul of the financial tracking system. Every expenditure was posted to a public website within 24 hours, with scanned receipts and invoices. Quarterly reports were emailed to all residents, breaking down exactly where every dollar went. It was the kind of transparency we should have had from the beginning. Jennifer led a community standards review committee that went through all the HOA rules and removed or revised ones that were outdated, overly restrictive, or just plain stupid. The regulation about trash bins being invisible from the street within 12 hours of collection changed to 72 hours, which actually made sense. The rules about holiday decorations were simplified from 3 pages of specific requirements to a simple statement about keeping displays tasteful and temporary. As for me, I just went back to living my life. I worked my software developer job, kept my lawn at a reasonable length, and didn't worry about violation notices anymore. The street sweeper became background noise again, a routine part of maintaining the neighborhood instead of a weapon of harassment. But I'd learned something valuable through the whole experience. HOAs exist to serve residents, not the other way around. When they forget that, when they become little fiefdoms ruled by petty tyrants more interested in power than service, regular people have the ability to fight back. It takes organization, documentation, and persistence, but it can be done. The following spring, the new HOA board organized a community cleanup day. Volunteers spread throughout Meadowbrook, picking up litter, trimming overgrown bushes, and touching up paint on common area fences. I signed up and spent a Saturday morning working alongside neighbors I'd come to know much better over the past year. At noon, the board provided pizza and drinks at the community center. Susan gave a short speech thanking everyone for their participation and noting how far we'd come as a community. She specifically mentioned the importance of residents staying engaged and holding leadership accountable. "We all saw what happened when people weren't paying attention," she said. "One person was able to abuse their authority for years because nobody was watching. That's not going to happen again, not on my watch, and hopefully not ever again in Meadowbrook." People clapped. I looked around the room at faces I recognized, people who'd become friends through our shared experience of fighting an unjust system. Harold, who'd provided wisdom and historical context. Marcus, whose accounting skills had uncovered the fraud. Jennifer, whose social media organizing had brought everyone together. Lisa, whose initial Facebook group had started everything. And dozens of others who'd shown up at meetings, signed petitions, and refused to be pushed around. Later that afternoon, I was cleaning up my tools when a couple approached me. They introduced themselves as the new owners of 89 Oakmont Circle, Deborah's old house. They'd bought it at the foreclosure auction for a good price and were fixing it up. "We heard some stories about the previous owner," the husband said. "Sounds like quite a situation." "That's one way to put it," the wife laughed. "Our real estate agent warned us about buying in an HOA community. Said they can be nightmares, but everyone we've talked to here has been great, very welcoming." "It wasn't always that way," I admitted, "but we fixed it. Sometimes you have to fight for your community to be what it should be." They nodded and headed back to their house. I watched them go, thinking about all the new families who would move into Meadowbrook over the years. They'd never know about Deborah Kensington or her schemes. They just see a well-run neighborhood with transparent leadership and fair rules. And that was exactly how it should be. That evening, I sat on my porch again, watching the sunset and reflecting on everything that had happened. From that first morning when the street sweeper had buried my leaves back on my lawn, to the creative solution I'd found by rerouting it to Deborah's yard, to the discovery of widespread fraud and the eventual arrests and convictions. It had been a wild ride. My phone buzzed with a notification. The HOA had posted the quarterly financial report. I opened it and skimmed through the numbers. Everything was clear, properly categorized and reasonable. The street sweeper maintenance was listed at $800 for routine service. Landscaping for common areas was $1,200, with the vendor name and invoice number provided. Insurance, utilities, management fees, all accounted for and sensible. I closed the report and smiled. This was what a homeowners association should be: boring, predictable, focused on actually maintaining the community instead of generating drama and enriching board members. A car drove past, and the driver waved. I waved back, recognizing another neighbor from the cleanup day. This sense of community, of people actually knowing and caring about each other, was something that had grown out of our shared struggle. Before the street sweeper incident, I barely knew anyone on my block. Now I had friends throughout Meadowbrook. As darkness fell, I thought about Deborah Kensington sitting in prison, probably regretting every choice that had led her there. I didn't take joy in her suffering, but I didn't feel bad about my role in exposing her crimes either. She'd had countless opportunities to do the right thing. When I'd first complained about the street sweeper schedule, she could have just adjusted it. When other residents raised concerns about finances, she could have been transparent. Instead, she'd chosen escalation and retaliation and ultimately theft. My little trick with the detour signs had been petty revenge. I could admit that. But it had also been the catalyst that started everyone comparing notes and realizing the problems were systemic. If Deborah's yard hadn't been buried in leaves that Monday morning, if she hadn't experienced firsthand the frustration her policies were causing residents, maybe people wouldn't have started organizing. Maybe she'd still be in power, still stealing, still making everyone's lives miserable. Sometimes you need a spark to start a fire, and that street sweeper full of autumn leaves had been one hell of a spark. The next few years passed quietly in Meadowbrook. The street sweeper continued its properly scheduled routes. The HOA board rotated members through regular elections, with good people stepping up to serve. Dues stayed low, services stayed good, and violations were handled fairly. I eventually learned that Deborah had been released from prison after serving 14 months of her 18-month sentence with good behavior. She and Robert had divorced, apparently unable to survive the stress of the criminal case and financial ruin. Last I heard, she'd moved somewhere upstate and was working retail, a far cry from her days as an all-powerful HOA president. The story became neighborhood legend. New residents would hear about it from old-timers over backyard barbecues. Details got exaggerated over time. Some versions had Deborah stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Others had her operating a whole network of fraud across multiple HOAs. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment, but people love a good story. Me. I just kept living my life at 247 Maple Grove Drive, Edgewater, New Jersey. I maintained my lawn, paid my dues, and stayed active in community affairs. I served a 2-year term on the HOA board myself, focusing on technology improvements like the financial transparency website and automated violation tracking system. And every autumn, when the leaves started falling, and the street sweeper made its rounds, I'd smile and remember that crazy October when a simple scheduling conflict had exposed corruption, brought down a petty tyrant, and taught a whole community the importance of standing up for what's right. The leaves still fell. The sweeper still swept. But now it was just another piece of neighborhood maintenance, not a weapon of harassment or a tool for generating bogus fines. And that simple change, that return to how things should have always been, made all the difference.